How can I make currency? If that's not the most common question in Path of Exile, it's gotta be somewhere in the top 3. And with good reason, too. It is simultaneously the most important thing that you need to do in the endgame, and arguably the thing that takes the most game knowledge to master. Hey everyone, welcome. It's Baron, and if any of you got deja vu listening to that intro, it's because it's not my first video on this topic. How can I make currency? If that's not the most common question in all of Path of Exile, it's gotta be in the top 3. Allow me to introduce my updated, comprehensive video on making currency in Path of Exile for beginners. And I do mean comprehensive. This is going to be a long format video. It's been around a year since the last video I made on this topic, and incredibly, there had not been a new Path of Exile 1 league since that one until the one we're in now, Mercenaries. So, with this new league out, and the influx of new players it's brought, it is time to revisit this topic and hopefully help some new folks who might not find the older video when it's buried in YouTube's algorithm. It's also an excellent opportunity for me to update the part of the video that focuses on specific methods or mechanics you can use for making currency, since, like I always say, videos like these are always snapshots in time, and the most effective methods will change with the economy and mechanics of Path of Exile. But those specific methods are just the final third of the video. Before that, I'm going to cover some common barriers, mistakes, and misunderstandings that new players commonly experience and how to overcome them, followed by some pieces of general advice or general principles that you should keep in mind. For those of you who've seen the previous video, some of these will sound pretty familiar, since these principles are pretty timeless. Many of them will stay the same. But in the interest of spicing things up, you may recall that my last video had 6 bullet points in each of the categories. Well, this time around we're doing 7 of each, and they will not all be the same as last time, especially the specific strategies part. Now, you could argue one way or the other, some of these may belong more in one category than the other, and that's all fair. You know, the whole barrier versus principle thing is a fairly arbitrary distinction, but basically I'm just going to try and keep the one category a bit more focused on things to avoid, and the other category a bit more focused on things to proactively do or learn. So let's dive in, starting with 7 common barriers, mistakes, and misunderstandings. Number 1. Thinking that making currency is too hard, too complex, takes too good of a build, too much time, too much game knowledge, any of that. In other words, this first barrier is getting trapped in the mindset of thinking that you are somehow irreversibly stuck wallowing with 4 Chaos Orbs and a few alchemies to your name. And so this is a message of hope to you if you're feeling that way. It is not the case. It does not need to be the case. I can definitely understand why you would feel that way. I did myself when I was in your shoes, but there is hope and I can get you started. Don't fall into the defeatist trap of not even trying. That's a surefire way to fail. Certainly, having more time, knowledge, and build strength will help, no doubt about it, but I promise you, it is possible to get a respectable amount of currency with limited amounts of those things. We can focus on the many farming strategies that don't require much of those things to be successful. Summary. Barrier 1 is a defeatist mindset. Believing making currency is too difficult or requires advanced builds can prevent progress. However, respectable currency gains are possible with limited knowledge and time by focusing on accessible farming strategies. So let's talk barrier or mistake number 2. When you are running an individual map, tracking down every last monster to quote-unquote get your money's worth out of the map. This one is the result of a couple of widespread logical fallacies or cognitive biases. Here's basically how it goes. I start out by giving you advice along these lines. I say something like, it's not worth the extra time spent chasing down those last few monsters in a map. Spending an extra 3 minutes just to kill a few of them is not worth it. You could have just started a new map and killed dozens or hundreds of monsters in those same 3 minutes because the density of monsters is higher in a fresh map. And then your rather reasonable response back to me might be something along the lines of, sure, I can get more money per minute in a new map, but isn't that just throwing away some of the value that I put into the current map? And actually, I would respond that that's true as far as it goes, and in some rare circumstances, it is actually a good argument for clearing the entire map after all. I will discuss some of those exceptions in just a moment, but in general, you have to keep in mind that the cost of the map itself is pretty minimal. A good endgame strategy will often be over-sustaining the actual map entry items, little map entry tokens, finding more than you use. And even those strategies that don't over-sustain maps can afford the paltry cost of a couple chaos on buying a map. The other important thing to keep in mind is that not every random monster is likely to be your source of currency. Special League mechanic monsters tend to have loot drops that are either higher in quantity or consist of unique and exotic things that you are target farming. In other words, not all monsters are created equal. In many endgame farming strategies, you are targeting some specific monsters or mechanics. And if you can confirm that you've already gotten all of that stuff out of that map, then you've likely already extracted 90% or more of the expected value from that map. It is supremely unlikely that some random mob of normal white rarity is going to drop something valuable. If your monster count is under 50, in other words, and you're pretty sure you've done all the league content there is, and the last monsters are probably far away on the other side of the map, it is time to portal out and start a new map. And now this is the part where you might come back at me with the last objection and logical fallacy. You say, look, I know it might be rare, I know it's not super logical, but what if one of those last few monsters had a Mirror of Kalander or something, or even just a Divine Orb? People even joke about this. It's such a common feeling that this is a common meme in the community. But first of all, even if monsters carrying items worked the way it would in real life, and a specific monster was carrying around a specific item, like a divine or even a mirror, you would have no way of knowing it. That specific guy is no more or less likely to be the one holding the winning lottery ticket than anyone else. In practical terms, it might as well be totally random, and there'd be no difference between killing that monster versus one in the next map, and of course you can kill a lot more per minute in the next map. But to drive this point home even further, an ARPG does not work like real life, at least this one doesn't. Monsters aren't carrying around specific items. It's not just as though we can't know what those monsters are going to drop until they drop it, like it's some kind of Schrodinger's divine orb. It is literally that those items do not exist yet. The loot table is only rolled when a monster's HP is reduced to 0. So that means that it is literally true that it does not matter whether you kill the next monster in this map or the next one. They are functionally identical as long as you are running maps with similar item quantity roll numbers on them, which you probably will be in a given strategy. If you have extracted all the things of known major value in a map, it's time to go. That does, however, bring me to those exceptions that I mentioned earlier. Yes, it is actually true that in some rare circumstances, extracting all the things of known major value in a map doesn't actually occur until that monster counter reads 0. For example, if you manage to come across one of those rare Eldritch Altars in late-tier maps that says all Eldritch minions now have a chance to drop a Divine Orb in that map, well, you don't leave that map until it's clean as a whistle, obviously. Or if you're running an ultra super duper juiced endgame strategy where you invested several divines just to run that one map, that probably means most monsters in it are more valuable than the average monster in a cheaper map, and it may actually be worth your time to kill them all. But typically, you're going to be aware if you're in a situation like that. You will have placed yourself into that situation. So, when in doubt, portal out. Summary. Barrier 2 is overclearing maps. Chasing down every last monster in a map wastes time. Since map costs are minimal and not all monsters drop valuable loot, it is more profitable to leave once major league mechanics and rewards are collected. Exceptions exist, such as rare Eldritch Altars or high investment maps, but generally, portaling out early maximizes efficiency. On to barrier or mistake number 3. Aimless mapping and just kind of hoping for the best. You open a map, you kill the monsters, and you leave, wondering why you don't seem to have any more currency in your inventory than before you started. This one is extremely understandable. If you've just completed the campaign for the first time, or if you've really never pushed seriously into endgame farming, then you really have only ever played the game in one way. You only ever had to play the game in one way. Enter the zone, kill the monsters, maybe seek out an objective or an exit, and then leave. And that's it. There hasn't been a need to devote any concentrated effort or planning to anything beyond that on a zone-by-zone basis. But, for better or for worse, things change now that we leave the campaign. We need a plan now, a focused, directed answer to the question, okay, how am I going to generate currency? What am I trying to do in a map? What items do I intend to find, and how do I intend to increase my odds of finding them? Basically, to boil it down, if I ask you, what are you trying to do in a map, and you kind of give me a blank stare like, I don't know, kill the monsters? What do you even mean? Then you're in luck, because that is the misconception, and when we get to the general principles section, you will hear about how you can come up with some fun, varied, and effective ways to answer the question, what are you trying to do in a map? Summary. Barrier 3 is aimless mapping. PoE is a game that rewards a consistent plan and proactively taking steps to acquire currency. So, barrier number 4 is closely related. Aimless everything. Puttering around your hideout, deciding between two gear pieces, thinking indecisively about what strategy you'll do next, losing 15 minutes because you glanced over at Netflix and oops, next thing you know that scene was really interesting, and now your character's gone idle and you haven't played in a while. There's this expression that the PoE community uses, and sometimes overuses, when discussing farming. Hideout is lava. You know, like playing the floor is lava, you ever do that as a kid? Same idea. The advice is basically to spend as little time as possible in your hideout, as little as humanly possible, because all time spent in hideout is not time spent out in maps, causing the game to generate new loot, like we talked about. Obviously, there are exceptions to this, hideout warrior type strategies like crafting and currency flipping, but here we're focusing on gameplay related strategies, actually killing monsters, in other words. In which case, staying in hideout is basically wasting time and not progressing anything. So needless to say, it is really easy to over-apply this advice, optimize the fun out of the game and just burn out. Not looking to do that. But here's the thing. Taken with a bit of moderation, this is genuinely good advice. It is true that if you've only got an hour to play before bed, and you spend 30 minutes of that aimlessly messing around at your stash, yeah, you're going to have trouble making currency, no doubt about it. But look, I'm not telling you to do anything like reorganize your whole hideout to minimize the number of steps taken between things. I'm not telling you to click a stopwatch to measure your time in hideout or any sweaty, intense stuff like that. But it is a good idea to sit down to play with a plan already in your head for what kind of content you're going to run, how you're going to run it, and why. And then as far as puttering around with build upgrades, look, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Everyone has to do build upgrades. And, puttering around with stuff, experimenting, that's an important part of the learning process. But I would at least recommend setting aside a specific chunk of time for doing that, rather than allowing yourself to be in the middle of something else and just randomly letting yourself get sidetracked by it. This should be something that you really only do when it's necessary to upgrade your character in order to continue progressing through the content. Not because you get bored after 3 maps and you can, maybe sub out this ring and that belt to go from 2 million damage to 2.3 million. No. That's just a distraction. There are lots of other forms of puttering around and aimless sitting in hideout, but those long minutes spent staring at your stash, staring at little gear tweaks, these are some of the prime culprits, which is why I focus on them. Summary. Barrier 4 is aimless everything. Having a plan and being proactive doesn't apply to just the time you spend in maps, it also applies to making sure you are spending time in maps. Next up, Barrier 5 is one that I'm actually going to frame a little differently than I did last time. I want to modify this advice a bit because I think in my former efforts to make it simple, easy to follow advice, I may have accidentally made it too black and white and lost some nuance. And since this is a particularly confusing one, and even a painful one to give up for many players, let's make sure we understand it. The general idea is about picking up and identifying way too many rare items off the ground. The core of this idea, which is unchanged and I stand by it, is that the vast majority of the equipable gear that drops in this game is total crap that nobody would ever want. And for every one item that you identify that winds up being worth a couple of divines, or even more rarely, for every item you pick up that's actually an upgrade for your own specific build, you will have wasted hours in the meantime picking up, identifying, evaluating, and vendoring hundreds, maybe even thousands of items that were utterly worthless. Hours you could have spent continuing to do the fun part, play the game, kill the monsters, and find more easily identifiable loot like currency, divination cards, and league-specific rewards. In fact, if you think about it, this is kind of related to that earlier barrier about hunting down every last monster. It is similar because your irrational worry about missing that 1 in 1,000 chance actually costs you the opportunity to take 1,000 more chances, if that makes any sense. I suspect that this misunderstanding will be particularly rough on folks coming over from Path of Exile 2 for the first time, since in that game it's my experience that we continue to pick up and identify rares much later into the farming progression. Now here's the issue. In my previous video, I made it sound like you should absolutely never under any circumstances pick up rares, but that's kind of an oversimplification. In the opening days of a league, it is still very important to pick things up because nobody has good gear yet. So the odds of finding an upgrade for somebody's build are actually pretty decent at that point. The odds are not stacked against you quite yet. You don't need to find the perfect 6-mod item with high-tier modifiers for it to have a chance of being better than what somebody is wearing right now when it's only day 2 of the league, for example. And then certain types of rare items will continue to be worth picking up a bit longer into the league than that. Desirable and rare base types, things like amethyst rings for chaos resistance, Stygian Vice belts for having a socket, and sometimes the numerically best base types, things like a Lich's Circlet Energy Shield helmet, for example. And then even after those get winnowed out of your filter because it's long enough into the league again, people have the items they need at that point, and maybe you're making better currency through other drops, there will still be some rares that should be inspected. Fractured items, synthesized items, or identified items with special mods from content like Incursion, Essence, and Delve, where they can sometimes have mods that are not available anywhere else in the game. And there are probably other important exceptions I'm missing. Please do drop them down in the comments below if you can think of one. But with all this said, these are still more like unusual caveats, and the central principle remains: the further we get into a league, the stricter your loot filter should get, so that by the time you are in tier 16 maps, you are never picking up regular old rare equipable gear and picking up other types of equipable gear, specialty type stuff, pretty infrequently, if at all. I know it sucks to get this advice as a newer player. I genuinely get it. I felt the same way. The thought process is like, this is an ARPG, damn it. What do you mean I'm not supposed to pick up the gear? Isn't the gear the point? And you're absolutely right, and it's a tough pill to swallow to have an experienced player like me tell you 99% of the gear that drops, unfiltered anyways, is utter trash. But unfortunate or not, this is the stark reality. In a game with an open trade economy, like we have, and that has a lot of advantages to it, it winds up being true, even inevitable, I would argue, that by a couple of weeks into the league, everyone is wearing gear with enough good modifiers that the statistical odds of picking up something off the ground that's better than what someone is wearing, well, the odds aren't great. Let's just put it that way. If you're interested in a full stats breakdown, I've got some good examples I could walk through, but for now, please just take my word that in the end, the stats do not work out in favor of picking up rare items off the ground. you would be, again, picking up and vendoring easily 100 or more items for every moderately okay one that you found and sold for even a few chaos. As for me, I'm just not willing to pick up and identify 100 items off the ground on the off chance that one of them is just good. Not even great, just good. Sell for 10 chaos. You would spend your time doing nothing but IDing and vendoring. To me, that sounds exhausting. You would spend a minimal amount of time actually playing the game and killing monsters, like I said. So, instead, with the exceptions listed previously for special item types, you'll just want to make sure that you are steadily graduating to stricter and stricter loot filters throughout a league to ensure that you're not wasting your time on unremarkable rare gear. As a rough rule of thumb, if you need it, use Filter Blade's strict or semi-strict filter on day 1, your preference, and then by the time you're in tier 16 maps, or by the end of week 2 of a league, whichever comes first for you, you should be on the very strict never sync loot filter from Filter Blade, and possibly start adding in your own custom modifications at that point to winnow out even more things that you find yourself looking at on the ground and just not picking up because you don't want to. You can winnow those things out. I rarely advise people to go all the way up to using the uber strict filter. I just personally find it safer, more understandable, more comfortable to start with very strict and then winnow out, do a spot check, like individual things from there if I want to. So, barrier number 5 is identifying too many rares. Most rare gear is worthless, and identifying too many wastes valuable playtime. Early in a league, picking up more rares is worthwhile, but as the league progresses, loot filters should be tightened up to avoid unprofitable items. Exceptions include valuable base types, fractured items, synthesized items, and special content mods. Moving on, barrier number 6. Well, if you're not finding good equipable items on the ground, what on earth are you finding? Well, for barrier or misunderstanding number 6, we're going to talk about how a lot of players fall into the trap of thinking that if you are not depositing a Chaos Orb or a Divine Orb into your stash, that you're not profiting. You look at an item on trade, something that you need, it's selling for 10 Divine Orbs, and you go, I haven't even seen a single Divine Orb drop all league. How the hell am I supposed to afford that? And the answer is that we have to redefine and widen the scope of what we consider to be profit. We need to understand the things that we can find, and in many cases already have found, that can be easily converted to Chaos and Divine Orbs. This is easier now than ever thanks to the new inclusion of the game's instant asynchronous currency exchange where you trade with other players. In PoE 2, this is the exchange that goes through the non-playable character Alva, but here in PoE 1, the NPC is Faustus. It does the same thing though. For basic stackable commodities, of which you will see there are an absolute ton of different types, you can put buy and sell orders for any type of currency, fragment, exotic crafting material, whatever that you can imagine. If you place a competitive offer that somebody's willing to pay, it will be filled immediately. No need to go to a hideout, no need to trade, it's just filled, and the currency is yours. Otherwise, if you place a slightly less competitive offer, it may take a while. You may have to wait for someone to get desperate enough to take that offer, but that's okay, because what asynchronous means in this context is that you can log out and walk away, and your offer is still up on the market, available to be taken. We'll talk some more about this in the principles section, but in brief, the idea is that you likely have a lot of things in your stash that can be converted to raw liquid currency. Very few farming strategies actually rely on finding raw divine orbs on the ground. The divine orbs I do have in my stash. Take a look. How many of those do you think I picked up off the ground myself? I don't know for sure, but it is a vanishingly small amount, probably single digits, no more than low double-digit number of those 100 to 200 divines that I'm currently fluctuating between as I buy some supplies. The vast majority of divines that I hold, that most players are holding, were picked up by someone else and have probably changed hands dozens of times. And if that doesn't quite make intuitive sense to you, like, wait, where are those divines even coming from? This is how it works. More divines are being created by finding them from monsters than there are being used. You can use divines on meta crafting at the crafting bench, or for their stated purpose of randomizing the modifiers on an item, but they are not being used for that as commonly as they are being found. So the total number of divine orbs in the economy just kind of grows throughout a league. They become like paper money is in the real world, being passed around with every purchase. Not many have to be created for a lot of them to exist. So to conquer this misunderstanding, it's important to wrap our heads around which stuff in our stash is worth divine orbs if traded. If you want to get a general idea of what the higher value or higher priority items currently in your stash are, I can strongly recommend the web tool called Wealthy Exile. It analyzes your stash tabs and compares the various consumable items to their current market value. This is a completely safe tool allowed by the game's terms of service, and many of us use this or similar tools. It's not perfect, since, for example, it will sometimes overvalue some low importance items like splinters or low value divination cards, and it will take something that's worth a fraction of a chaos and round it up to 1, so that if you have 50 of those things, it looks like you have 50 chaos when you actually only have 10 chaos worth of this stuff. So it's imprecise. And then you also have the problem, it's worth double checking whether an item might be worth more or less on the Faustus exchange versus through the traditional player-to-player trade, which is what Wealthy Exile is measuring. But with those caveats said, it is a great tool for getting just a ballpark, vague idea of where the value lies in your stash. If nothing else, it's a great learning tool for quickly pointing you in the right direction, even if you don't rely on it to religiously track your net worth over time. Summary. Barrier 6 is misunderstanding profit sources. Profit is not only from raw currency drops like chaos or divine orbs, but also from consumables like fragments, scarabs, divination cards, and other specialty items which can be traded easily. Tools like Wealthy Exile help players recognize the value in their stash beyond the obvious currency. And now, the 7th and final barrier to talk about, and as I said in my last video on this topic, this one is as much a cautionary note for content creators like me as it is a note for new players. See, content creators, and I'm sure I have been accidentally guilty of this myself, despite trying to avoid it, we sometimes fall into the trap of saying things like any build can do this farming strategy when explaining how we're making currency. But it's important to keep in mind what we usually mean by that. We're talking about any build in the sense of any class and skill combination, assuming you've advanced the build to the point that it can do basic tier 16 map content. What we're usually not meaning is that any fresh-eyed level 72 character right out of the campaign with a 4-link in a dream can do the strategy. What can happen is that a newer player will try a strategy, not be able to do it, or at least not be able to do it with any kind of speed or profit margin, and then they either blame themselves for being bad at the game, or they throw up their hands in frustration and think there's something wrong with the game itself. But it's really important that we all have the self-awareness to realize when our build isn't yet able to do whatever map blasting strategy that our favorite streamer is running. We will hopefully get there eventually, but as the saying goes, discretion is the better part of valor. There are farming strategies for every level of expertise and investment, and we should have the grace to recognize when we may need to adopt a strategy that, yes, theoretically has lower profit per hour or whatever, but we can actually do it. You're not making any profit per hour if you're ripping 6 portals in a map and then walking away in disgust. Summary. Barrier 7 is overreaching build requirements. Content creators often say any build can farm certain strategies, but this often still assumes a build capable of handling high-tier content. New players should choose strategies suitable for their current build level to avoid frustration and currency losses. And that is all 7 barriers, mistakes, and misconceptions. Being a doomer, overclearing maps, aimless mapping, aimless everything, identifying too many rares, misunderstanding profit drivers, and reaching too far past the current level of your build. So, now, as those of you who have seen any of my videos before will know, I like to get the bad news out of the way first, then move on to the good news. So, now that we've talked about some of those things that you should be careful not to be doing or thinking, let's talk positives and cover some of the things that you should be doing or thinking, principles to understand to make you better at making currency. The first one is deceptively simple, and we already started to talk about it earlier. Consistency is king. Have a plan and stick to it. You should know in advance which specific game mechanics you will be targeting to make currency, know what your profit drivers are, those items that you want to look out for when they drop, and know how you are going to maximize your chances of seeing and being rewarded by that mechanic through the use of your Atlas passive tree, scarabs, map device crafting options, and sometimes even specific stat rolls or layouts on the map item itself, depending on the strategy. Even strategies outside the Atlas that don't use maps, things like delve or blighted maps, these still benefit from consistency. You become well practiced at the mechanic, first of all. You also play long enough to overcome streaks of bad RNG when, it's just bad luck, things aren't dropping for a little while. You also accrue a bulk of items, allowing you to sell at a premium price for the buyer's convenience of only having to do one trade. They'll pay extra for that. And of course, with this kind of a mental thing, you minimize your chances of getting sidetracked or getting FOMO for something else, fear of missing out for something else, because you've got that firm idea in your head, that firm plan to focus on. You don't have to worry about every idea or farming strategy that you hear about. You can just proceed with your plan. Summary. Principle number 1 is that consistency is king. Have a clear plan targeting specific game mechanics and profit drivers. Optimize your Atlas passives, scarabs, and map device crafts to target those things, and don't get sidetracked too often. And now on to number 2. Well, if consistency is king, then consumables are queen. They are the co-equal rulers of your profit. As discussed back in barrier number 5, most equipable gear just isn't worth much far into the league. People only need to wear one thing at a time per gear slot, and they don't upgrade for a long time. So the market is going to adjust for that. The average equipable item you pick up off the ground will not be better than what most players are already wearing, and they will not pay anything for it. On the other hand, consumables tell you why they are so valuable right in the name. They are consumed. Items like Chaos Orbs, Scarabs, Scouring Orbs, Stacked Decks, Eldritch Currency, these things exist to be used and used up. Once they are used, they are gone, and the player using them will need more. In other words, there is a market need for a constant new supply of these things to be created, produced. And that is the central pillar of most farming strategies. Supply those things. Resonators from Delve. Boss entry tokens from memory threads or tier 17 maps. Essences. Harvest life force. Beasts from Einhar. Whether used for crafting, fishing for elite items, or anything else, all of these types of things have something in common. They get used in bulk quantities by players all over the world, and we can benefit from finding and selling them. Consistency is king, and consumables are queen. Target consumable items. Summary. Principle 2 is that consumables are queen. Consumable items like Chaos Orbs, Scarabs, and crafting materials have ongoing demand as they are used up, making them reliable sources of profit compared to equipable gear. Which actually brings us neatly to the closely related number 3. You might already have more currency than you think, distributed across your stash through many different types of consumable items. This one was borderline on whether it belonged in barriers or principles, and it's definitely closely related to barrier 6 about profit drivers, but I think overall this news is good and deserves its own category on the principles side. There are a few reasons contributing to this effect where you have more than you think. And although this illusion gets exacerbated if you're bouncing around between different farming mechanics without settling on one, it can honestly happen to you mentally even in a dedicated strategy. See, what can often happen is, as mentioned in that barrier section, not all profit is coming from raw chaos and divine orbs. Much of it is in these other things. fragments, div cards, so-called bubblegum currency, the cheap, colorful little variety of orbs like scours, chromatics, alterations. So when you look at your stash after, say, like a 2-hour farming session, you might get disheartened because you look and it seems like you've only got a little bit more of a bunch of different little things. Like I said, your eyes might be naturally drawn to things of obvious known value like chaos and divines, and if you don't see those things, you might get the first impression that you didn't profit much. But what about things like, take an Eldritch Chaos Orb. Every one of those is worth a double-digit number of chaos. Scarabs, Blight Oils, Exalted Orbs, a stack of a few dozen Scouring Orbs, stacked decks, even Tier 16 maps of desirable layouts. All of these things are worth chaos and divines, and they can add up. As mentioned earlier, in my opinion, the best way to get an idea of what you have that can be easily traded for liquid currency like chaos is to use a free tool like Wealthy Exile. It quickly and easily examines your stash and approximates what kind of value you're actually holding. Don't rely on it to be a perfect measure, but it's a great indicator of the types of things that you have that you can be trying to sell. It's also good for dispelling that illusion that you have nothing, which can be frustrating and make you want to quit. Keeping an eye on your net worth as it grows can be a big motivator. Always try to be aware of where your profits are coming from and what your items are worth. Summary. Principle 3 is to recognize your hidden wealth. Players often hold more valuable items than they realize. Using tools to assess stash value can motivate and guide your selling strategies. Principle number 4. Sell shovels in a gold rush. Now this one does require a bit of game knowledge and being tapped into the PoE community, but you know this expression, right? Sell shovels in a gold rush. The principle goes like this. Whenever gold was discovered in the ground in some region, only the earliest, fastest, and in fact luckiest prospectors were able to actually make money from digging and panning for gold. Everyone else spends time and money trying, but is lucky to break even, much less hit it big. In real life, this happens because, of course, gold is not common in the ground, and it gets snapped up quickly by the earliest prospectors. In Path of Exile, this happens more because when some big-name content creator popularizes a lucrative-looking strategy, the price of the entry tokens for that strategy versus the targeted loot that you're trying to sell from it, they quickly stabilize on the market. So like, for example, if a strategy involving Delirium on tier 16.5 Jungle Valley maps, if that were to get really popular, the prices of Delirium orbs and that map layout, they would go up because more people are demanding it, people are willing to pay a bit more for them, and the supply is limited. But then, at the same time, the reverse is also happening with whatever the profit drivers of the strategy are. Whether that is scarabs, simulacrum splinters, cluster jewels, something like that, whatever it is, but large quantities of those are now flooding the market because of all these new people trying the strategy, and the prices of those drop. In other words, the profit margins for doing the strategy quickly get razor thin. If you're trying a strategy like 48 hours after it gets popularized in the community, you are likely paying more to run it and selling the items that you get for less. So how do you avoid this? Well, one way is to just wait a week or two until the hype dies down and then you'll probably be okay. But the other way, and the focus of this principle, is to sell shovels to the prospectors instead. Delirium orbs get popular? Well, run a cheap Delirium strategy that produces stacks of Delirium orbs, sell them to the people who are rushing to try this new strategy. Again, with the tier 16.5 Jungle Valley maps, are those getting expensive? Great. Make that map layout your favorite, and then try and run a map generation strategy like the Crimson Ore Magic Monster Farming that I'll cover in the specific strategy section. There's also, if everyone's focused on running tier 16.5 and tier 17 maps, well, you should think about supplying things to the community that everyone needs, or a lot of people need, but that are not being generated easily or at all by those tier 16.5 and 17 maps. Things like Delve Resonators, those aren't coming from those maps. Things like Megalomaniac Jewels from Simulacrum. Things like Blight Oils. You can use a tool like PoE.Ninja, a website, to keep an eye on many of these sorts of things and see when prices go up, indicating an opportunity to sell. If you're not super knowledgeable about endgame farming strategies, not to worry. That's okay. This is a principle that can be applied in small doses with whatever knowledge you do have, and keeping an eye on these sorts of things actually winds up being a great tool for slowly amassing more game knowledge. Summary. Principle 4 is to sell shovels in a gold rush. Instead of competing with everyone on popular farming strategies, sell essential items that others need to run those strategies, such as delirium orbs or whatever else it might be. Monitoring market trends with tools like PoE.Ninja helps identify these opportunities. Principle 5. Bootstraps, bootstraps, bootstraps.
You strapped a cannon to bootstraps.
Call it bootstrapping, snowballing, reinvestment, positive feedback loop, whatever your preferred term is. But whatever you call it, the idea is that you start small and feed some of the currency you gain back into both your character and your farming strategy in order to get even more currency in the future. It's important to recognize both aspects here, the character and the farming strategy. Both of those are things that, if you invest into them properly, can cause you to make more currency at a faster rate. Because sure, if you pick a basic strategy that nets you maybe a divine orb worth of stuff every hour, you could take that and you could farm a Mageblood. It would take you a few hundred hours. Magebloods typically cost between 200 and 300 divine orbs. But that sounds like a pretty long time. And what if instead you use some of that early currency to buy or craft some gear for your character to make you faster, make you more able to kill and survive in high tier content? That harder content is typically correlated with higher profit because you get more and better drops the further up you go. So investing into your character to be able to do that harder content and or do it faster might ramp up your divines per hour made from 1 to hypothetically 2, 4, 5, maybe even more. Suddenly, instead of farming 300 hours for that Mageblood, maybe it's only 60, all because you invested those first few hours worth of currency into making your character better. But that's probably the easier part to understand, right? If you're watching this video, if you're playing an ARPG like Path of Exile deep into the endgame, you probably don't need me to tell you to upgrade your build. That part tends to come pretty intuitively. People just automatically, we want to feel stronger in these games. You probably want to do this already without me needing to tell you. But investing into the farming strategy itself, while it sounds a little scary and maybe even a bit counterintuitive, this can be just as important, or even more so, for ramping up your profits and can multiply your rate of gain even further on top of having a faster, better character. In a previous principle, we talked about farming up and selling consumables, things like scarabs and high-tier specialty maps. Well, there is a very good reason that so many people out there are willing to pay you good money for those types of things. They work. They work. They do what we want them to do. If you use them right, and we will talk about exactly what using them right means in the next principle, they can ramp up your profit per hour even further, far more than enough to make up for the price that you pay for them, make up that price and beyond. Just to give a hypothetical example, and of course, the exact numbers will vary with the economy, but you could easily do a free harvest strategy. It costs you nothing except a simple tier 16 map, which you will likely oversustain. You will never spend a single chaos orb on this strategy, neither to the map device nor to any other player. It is all pure profit, money for nothing. Nothing except your time. You might only be making 1, 2, or 3 divine orbs an hour worth of harvest life force on a free strategy, and that is important. On the one hand, of course, you might not want to obsessively min-max your divines per hour like some stock day trader, kind of squeeze all the fun and spontaneity out of the game. I totally get that. I feel the same way too. But, on the other hand, moderation. You don't have unlimited time, none of us do, and you might have a specific item or build that you would like to save up for sometime before the heat death of the universe, you know? And, again, maybe you're not a full-time 50-plus hour a week gamer who can or even wants to just sit down for 3 weeks straight, stopping for nothing but sleep and food. I'm not, and I don't. So, maybe I and maybe you would prefer to make more than a couple divines per hour, even if you're not obsessing over the exact number. So I understand. I feel the same way. So maybe, just for example, you invest something like 10 chaos into every map, into this harvest strategy, instead of doing it for free. And this works out, you're investing something like 100 plus chaos per hour, depending on how long a map takes you. But maybe, yeah, you're spending 100 chaos per hour, but maybe that ramps your income up to 5 or 6 divines per hour, where divine orbs are typically worth between 1 and 200 chaos. The difference in income, in other words, between this version and the free version is several divines per hour, far outstripping the paltry 100 chaos that you spent per hour. And then, of course, this process can happen again iteratively. Bootstrapping, right? Feed it back in. You do this both for your character's strength and the amount that you invest into the strategies. You make your character even stronger, to do even harder content and do it even faster. And then you use your profits to maybe start investing 2 divines per hour into a strategy, not just 100 chaos. But now suddenly maybe you're making back up 12 divines for a net profit of 10. It keeps going up. You could choose to do this even again, getting even stronger, etc., etc. This is the way that it goes. It can be scary to spend money on a strategy not knowing if you're going to make that money back. I'll speak for myself. I rarely do strategies where I'm investing multiple divines into a single map. Even though I cognitively know this stuff perfectly well, I just don't like it. But to a point, I do ramp myself up every single league. If you are doing a proven, reliable strategy from a trusted content creator, if you're not doing it in those opening 48 hours when the supplies are crazy expensive, if you spend enough time doing it to smooth out any dry streaks of bad luck, it is almost always worth it to invest. As a rule, the vast majority of the time, your net profits will be higher if you can afford to invest some into a strategy. And higher investment usually leads to higher profits even after subtracting that investment cost. Summary. Principle 5 is to bootstrap your progress. Reinvest profits into upgrading both character and farming strategies to increase income rates. Investing currency into scarabs, maps, or gear can multiply returns significantly over time. But that does bring us on to principle number 6. A closely related one, in fact. Synergy. No, not synergy like when your corporate boss at work tells you that you need to maximize synergy by going back to the drawing board and doing a deep dive to key in on the low-hanging fruit, think outside the box and trust the process, then touch base before COB. No buzzwords here. I'm talking about synergy in the literal sense. Using separate pieces that make each other better multiplicatively, causing the result to be literally better than the sum of the parts could have been. Let's talk about a concrete example to make sense of this. And since I started talking about Harvest for the previous principle, let's go ahead and just continue that topic, because Harvest has the benefit of being one of the most straightforward and easy to understand farming mechanics, because literally you are just killing the monsters and picking up the precisely 4 types of loot that they drop, all of which can be instantly sold on the currency exchange. This is very simple to understand, so it makes a good example. So let's say that you start out with that free Harvest strategy. It's easy enough to pull off. You just need enough Atlas Tree skill points to guarantee 100% chance of Harvest appearing in every map. Plus, then, of course, you take some of the crucial and obvious nodes on the tree that make Harvest better. Bumper crop for more Harvest plots per map, bountiful harvest for more monsters and therefore more rewards, doubling season for a chance to duplicate life force, and Heart of the Grove to raise your chances of getting a Harvest boss, and occasionally allowing you to use both sides of a Harvest plot, not just one, like you usually could. You will also, by necessity, be picking up all the small travel nodes along the way that do good things like increase Harvest life force drops and giving it a chance to duplicate. You could probably arrange a basic Atlas tree like this for under 70 points, give or take, and then you're off to the races. Just fire up a map, run the Harvest, complete it, and get out. Maybe killing the map boss if you feel like it, if the strategy demands it. Map entry items are pretty easy to come by, as I've been saying, and you can just do this mindlessly, essentially for free, for as long as you want. Harvest is profitable. You will make money doing this. But now let's introduce a scarab into the mix to raise those profits a bit. How about the Harvest Scarab of Doubling? Sure, it doubles monsters' health, so it makes them harder, but it also doubles the loot they drop, and even though it currently costs around 10 chaos at the time of recording, the amount of extra life force it drops exceeds that cost. You will never lose money doing this. you'll make a modest bit more profit per hour by using this scarab, even after accounting for subtracting that cost. But then let's switch it up. Skip the Harvest Scarab of Doubling. Let's say instead of that, we choose to go with the Harvest Scarab of Cornucopia. This is a more expensive scarab at 40 to 50 chaos a pop, and it has a different effect. On average, it allows you to fight around 2.25 harvest bosses per map, far exceeding the normal average, which isn't even one boss per map on average. These bosses drop a ton of life force, hundreds of the stuff, as long as your Atlas tree is set up for it, so you'll be leaving the map with likely over 2,000 life force on average, currently worth around 70 to 80 chaos. So once again, same as before, you will find that by including this scarab, you make modestly more profit than if you had tried the free version, even after you account for subtracting the cost. But here's where we get to the synergy part. What if instead of including one or the other, you included both? What happens is that you don't just add a little bit of profit from one and a little bit from the other. These are multiplicative with one another. You can think of it in either sense. You can either think of it as the Harvest Scarab of Cornucopia that adds these bosses. It's now worth twice as much because the juice from those bosses is being literally doubled. Or you can think of it as the Harvest Scarab of Doubling is now worth several times as much because the baseline stuff that it's doubling is a way larger baseline coming from these bosses. It's the same thing. It's two sides of the same coin, two ways of looking at the same interaction. But either way, this is what synergy is all about. Each scarab, when used together, becomes worth more than it could have been alone. It profits you more than it could have done by itself. And you're going to find this same thing is true in other strategies. Look at Legion for another example. Increasing the number of legions in a map and the number of sergeants per legion is, of course, multiplicatively good. You're getting more value out of each scarab. The scarabs are making each other more valuable. It can even work when combining two different mechanics. For example, Delirium is a mechanic that adds way more monsters to a map. They become packed very densely in the map. And Beyond is a mechanic that benefits from having many monsters close together to spawn more Beyond monsters. By including both in the same map, you will get far more monsters than you'd have gotten running one mechanic at a time. And that is synergy. You will want to make sure that you are running planned strategies that synergize the scarabs along with the Atlas passive tree, your map device crafting option, and often, like I said before, even things like the map layout or modifiers on the map to ensure that they are all benefiting one another to the highest possible degree. Summary. Principle 6 is to synergize mechanics. Combine game mechanics, scarabs, and Atlas tree points that enhance each other multiplicatively, such as using multiple different scarabs for the same mechanic to boost loot and profit beyond what individual parts would yield. So now, let's talk about the seventh and final principle, and it's one whose shadow has kind of loomed over this entire video so far. You've probably found yourself thinking about it one way or the other, whether you meant to or not. You've probably noticed that many of the principles I've talked about can be best implemented by having game knowledge. Game knowledge is another multiplier on farming profits. It's certainly possible, like I said, to do simple farming strategies that don't require much in the way of knowledge, and that harvest one is a great example of that. You can just follow a simple cookie cutter blueprint of which scarabs and Atlas tree to use, and you'll do great. But so much of the game becomes easier, faster, and more profitable when you know more about it. Game knowledge is a litany of things. Game knowledge is the ability to look at a map's modifiers for under a second and know whether your build can handle it or not. Game knowledge is hearing somebody say, I'm running a Syndicate and map boss rush strategy, and at least have a decent idea of what their setup probably looks like. You've got an educated guess. Game knowledge is knowing which items are worth picking up to look at and which aren't, not to mention knowing when in a league you should clean up your loot filter for particular items to stop seeing them on the ground altogether. Game knowledge, it is knowing which unique items have important roll ranges where a bad roll is vendor trash and a good roll can be worth multiple divines. Game knowledge is knowing intuitively how to upgrade your build so that you're not spending hours aimlessly staring at your POB and at your stash. It's knowing when it's better to craft an item versus buy it. It's knowing good positioning and dangerous monster modifiers so that you can stay alive and kill faster. It's knowing why the price of something is high and how to take advantage of that. It is knowing how to advance your Atlas tree quickly and get to those juicy farming strategies earlier and more efficiently in a league. It is knowing which builds, strategies, and creators happen to be reliable sources of information, and which build strategies and creators are at risk of being bait. So how do you actually do this? That's a lot. How do you do this without just pumping 10,000 hours into the game? Well, first of all, we have to say it, time in-game definitely does help. There's no two ways about that. Best way to get good at piano is to play a lot of piano, and the same is definitely true here to a degree. But there are some things that you can do to speed up the learning process too. You can take advantage of the tools we've discussed, things like Wealthy Exile, PoE Ninja, to see which sorts of items are worth currency. You can go to poewiki.net when you don't recognize or understand something. You can read up on it. You can go use craftofexile.com or poedb.tw to understand item mods and the odds of getting those mods. Beyond that, you can immerse yourself in the community. Find a streamer you enjoy watching or a guild or Discord server where people are routinely talking about the game. You can hang out in the Reddit questions thread or the builds subreddit. You can watch people there getting their question answered. You can ask some of your own, maybe even answer some. If you know the answers to them, best way to learn is by teaching, right? And then most of all, you can approach the game with a general attitude of curiosity and desire to learn. Not just about farming, but about everything you come across. I'm going to use the same metaphor here that I used in the last video on this topic because I think it's a good one. It's a good comparison. Look to real-life historical examples where humanity's knowledge leapt forward in some way. Think about a revolutionary discovery like the radio. Suddenly we have the ability to send effectively real-time audio of our own voices across vast distances without the need for wires. This is a staggering achievement. And while we're thinking about that, try to remember this. The core scientific knowledge needed to make that radio device, the fundamental discoveries about physics that were required, they were not discovered because somebody set out to make a radio. The Queen of England or the Pope, they didn't set some bounty and say, I'll give fabulous wealth to the person who invents something that will let me broadcast my voice into every home for miles around. That didn't happen. And more importantly, even if some leader did make that offer, it wouldn't have worked. It couldn't have worked. The necessary principles were discovered by curious people who couldn't have possibly known the full ramifications of what they were studying. They were just adding to the general knowledge base. Approach Path of Exile that way. Be curious about different builds, about league mechanics, unique items, patch notes, crafting methods, community trends. You might be surprised how well this mentally prepares you to be good at a seemingly unrelated thing like making currency. Summary. Principle 7 is to grow your game knowledge. Strive for deep understanding of game mechanics, builds, mods, and other game elements by continuing to play the game, participating with the PoE community, and using external tools and resources. Be curious. But that is it for 7 principles to keep in mind. Consistency is king, consumables are queen, you might have more than you think, sell shovels in a gold rush, bootstrapping, synergy, and game knowledge. And now on to the fun part. What can you actually do right now to go make some currency? 7 actual mid-ish level strategies to try out. I'll give you a brief overview of each of them in this video, then link you out to more comprehensive or detailed guides elsewhere if you're interested in following up. Many of these are ones that I have a lot of personal experience with, so I can vouch for them, is one thing, and I will often be linking to my own guides on the topics. But I will also be linking to some other trusted content creators as well. Now look, hopefully this goes without saying, but this isn't going to be your crazy 20, 25, 30 divine per hour top-end strategies. Cartography Scarab of Risks, Titanic Rogue Exiles, Blight Heart, crazy Alva Evolution Shrine stuff. I know them, I've run them, I like some of them, but this isn't the place for that. This is supposed to be a beginner-friendly video, so while I'm not going to shortchange you and try to sell you some snake oil that winds up netting less than a divine per hour, we're also not going to be covering that top-end stuff, the things that you would already need a great build and tons of game knowledge for, plus probably a lot of currency to invest into it. No, this is going to be 7 relatively straightforward and accessible strategies that you can get started with only a modicum of game knowledge and currency. Most of these will assume that you are at least able to competently navigate red maps up through tier 16, though some, like Delve, Harvest, and Blight, can actually be done at lower levels with no investment, for lower profit, of course, if you just need to get your very earliest currency. If that's the case for you, you can also do the Chaos Recipe, early Eldritch Altars, Essences, and constructing Alva Temples. These are just some free or cheap low-tier methods that you can use to kind of get up to this stage. But for now, I'm going to focus on strategies that are introductory only in the sense that, you've just broken into the real end game. Like, if you feel like you're treading water a bit now that you've broken into tier 16 maps and you want to make some really reliable divines to start ramping up your build, that's what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to try and go in approximately escalating order of difficulty, complexity, and investment, though, of course, it's not going to be an exactly linear list, since sometimes the free things can be more complex and the simpler things can be more expensive, but we'll do our best to kind of maintain some semblance of order here. First up is Harbinger. Harbinger is a lot like Harvest in the sense that it is one of the simplest and most accessible farming methods that I'm going to be putting here. The entire strategy boils down to kill blue man, pick up currency shards. That's it. That's the strategy. The most complex part of it, and I use the term complex very loosely, is simply the fact that the main Harbinger you're targeting, he doesn't take damage directly. It's perfectly normal, don't worry, if you notice that your hits are doing nothing to him. In fact, you lower his health by killing the other little blue men that he summons around him. And once you know that, that's it. That's really all you need to know. I'll link you to my own guide on how I set up the scarabs in the Atlas tree, how my results were last league, but everything is very similar this league. In brief, you are using scarabs and the Atlas tree to maximize the number of harbingers per map, cause most of them to be replaced by a powerful king harbinger who has better loot, cause their loot drops to double, and that's it. Your mundane every map currency drivers will be things like annulment orbs, ancient orbs, chaos orbs, and exalted shards. You're going to be picking up some of those basically every map. I think I average something like 3 or 4 annuls and 3 or 4 ancients, something like that. Then your once every 4 or 5 map jackpot, those are going to be fracturing shards. These will typically drop in stacks worth around a divine on average, give or take. And then beyond that, your once every, 100 maps or so, hard to estimate, but your once in a while huge jackpot will be a full fracturing orb, not just the shards, and these can be worth 5 to 10 divines. Then finally, your once in 1,000 maps uber jackpot will be a stack of 2 or more mirror shards, each worth dozens of divines. Their value only goes up throughout a league, so the later in a league that you're doing this, the better it is to find a mirror shard. Now look, you do not set out on this strategy planning on finding those mirror shards. It's just nice mentally that they are out there as a tantalizing prospect. I have found them on 2 separate occasions in my PoE career, but in fairness, I've done a lot of Harbinger, so, that kind of balances out. It's not too surprising. The profits from your reliable profit drivers, things like Ancients, Exalts, Fracturing Orbs, these are more than enough to make this a winning strategy, even if you never lay eyes on a Mirror Shard. In any case, for Harbinger, like I said, both the entry tokens and the rewards from this strategy are very similar in price this league to what my video showed from last league. In fact, I think some of the scarabs are even cheaper, so the profit margins should be pretty similar. This is, in summary, a chill, zen-like farm as far as I think, that a wide variety of endgame builds can handle effectively, and it does not require a great deal of strategy or overthinking. Now at number 2, we've got an old favorite standby, and this one is the specialty of my friend Jorgen, another content creator. Full disclosure, we've got a podcast together, Coffee and Chaos, and this strategy we are talking about the Delve Mines. Delve is a bit of an oddball because it takes place entirely off to the side, away from the Atlas. You only occasionally have to run a couple maps here and there to get the fuel called sulfite that you need to power the Delve minecart. But other than that, you are solely in the mines and you don't need any more maps. Now, Jorgen, he's the undisputed master of this mechanic, so I'll always link you to his channel for anything that you might need in terms of details and strategy for Delve. Highly recommended. But in terms of a brief overview, Delve is an infinitely scaling mechanic in which you fight your way between different nodes, which each have a specific type of encounter and a specific type of reward for completing that encounter. This is all viewed on the Delve chart, which extends out infinitely down, left, and right. How far down you go determines how hard the monsters get, and they can get hard at deep levels. Beyond level like 1,000 or so, you're pretty much looking at only dedicated Delve-only builds in order to compete with that content. And those builds, they can get pretty niche and pretty expensive. But fortunately, there are perfectly profitable things to be doing at more modest depths, 250, 300, 350, around there. These are the depths that Jorgen tends to focus on for his guide content. That's where some of the more lucrative bosses and other specialty nodes start showing up, and so you can just pick a depth around there that's comfortable for your character and farm infinitely sideways, staying at the same difficulty the whole time. Your most consistent profit driver will be turning in a resource called Azurite, these blue crystals that are dotted all over the Delve chart, for 1-socket resonators. These are a type of Delve crafting currency that you can get from Nico, the NPC associated with Delve. These can be instantly liquidated with Faustus via the in-game currency exchange, and they're quite profitable. You don't need to worry too much about what they do if you don't want to. You just know that other players do need them. You will also have less consistent jackpots, things from 3 main sources that you'll come across every once in a while. Number 1, you will sometimes find specialty fossil nodes. Like resonators, fossils are Delve-specific crafting currency. You don't need to know what they do to know that they're profitable, but feel free to look them up if you're curious. And there are specialty fossils that can only be found at these particular nodes. Things like fractured fossils, hollow fossils, faceted. Again, look into it if you're curious, but like most farming methods in Path of Exile, you're providing a good or a service to someone for a profit. It's simple. Number 2, in these jackpots, sometimes you will find specialty nodes for particular item types. You'll see labels, things like minion items, chaos items, fire items, stuff like that. This means that the node will drop items that have special modifiers. I talked about this a little bit earlier. They're related to that topic, fire, lightning, minion, whatever, and these are typically modifiers that cannot be found anywhere outside of Delve. So they can be valuable if you find them because nobody else is getting them. Every once in a while, you will find a massive jackpot among these. You'll need to look into the exact ones that are worth currency, but for example, minion nodes that can drop the +1 to maximum specters on a chest armor, that's consistently very valuable. And then finally, the third type of jackpot is finding bosses and hoping they drop something good. So Delve bosses like all the Crystal King. You have to learn the fight, but he can drop some genuine double-digit divine jackpot items. For the rest of Delve, I'll let Jorgen take the wheel from here, but I'll just finish by saying that Delve is a very unique feeling playstyle. It's, not for everyone. Some love it, some hate it. If you enjoy it, it's awesome. Again, this is another one that I would say I find very zen and very relaxing. I can just kind of zone out and delve, man. Just delve. Next up, for number 3. Well, I already gave you basically half the strategy, giving you examples during the principles section, so might as well make it official here. Harvest is strategy number 3, and it is only the slightest shade more complex than Harbinger, while being very similar in terms of how simple and consistent the profits are. The only reason I didn't list this at number 2 is because one version I'm going to recommend, it does have modestly higher investment costs per map, but in terms of overall simplicity, it's really hard to beat this. Now, once again, the full guide I'm going to link here is actually my own. There are other guides out there, but many of them focus on more expensive and complex versions of Harvest, so I think this may be the best place to start before branching out later, if you'd like to. In terms of that slight added complexity that I mentioned, what I mean is that you do have a tiny bit of decision-making in this one. Every Harvest plot is divided in 2. and you have to choose which side to fight and therefore take the rewards from, the juice, the life force. Each side is randomly assigned one of the 3 harvest colors, blue, purple, or yellow. You should theoretically check market prices before you start farming to ensure that you're picking the optimal crop every time, but in practice, if I'm being honest, I literally cannot remember a time when yellow has not been the most expensive and therefore yellow the most optimal choice. The only other factor to consider is the rarity of the monsters in each plot. The rarity is tied to how good the rewards are, of course, and it's indicated by the color of the monster's name, listed on every harvest plot. Deeper, brighter colors always appear at the bottom of the list and indicate higher rarity monsters, with an occasional jackpot find of a harvest boss listed in that familiar orange gold type color you probably associate with unique items. These bosses are the main focus of the strategy in my linked video, since there is a way to force them into every map, and their rewards are naturally the best. The strategy can be done without them if you find that they are taking too long to kill, or if they are too dangerous for your build, or if you just find that the scarab that you need to force them into a map is too expensive for you. That's fine. The strategy will still be profitable without them. It's just better once you are able to afford the scarab and handle those bosses. In any case, the monster rarity thing here is really the only complicating factor in the strategy outside of the color of the juice. If there is an approximately equal number of rare monsters in each plot, you choose yellow, if it's available. If one side has rare monsters or a boss, and the other side does not, choose the side with the rarer monsters, regardless of the juice type. And that's really all there is to it. The loot is incredibly simple. Like I said, 90% of what drops is just the 3 colored juice types, with the occasional drop of a sacred blossom from a boss, which is worth a little bit more. All 4 of these things can be easily and instantly liquidated on the in-game currency market with Faustus. It couldn't be simpler. For our next strategy, number 4, we are going to flip-flop cost and complexity, dropping the cost down to nearly 0, while adding in a modest degree of complexity. We are going to talk about Syndicate, or Betrayal, the Jun mechanic, that crazy conspiracy board full of pins and strings connecting the various enemies that you can fight. Now, the good news is that this visual and the randomness of the options you get at every encounter actually create a sort of fog of illusion that masks the underlying mechanic, which is deceptively simple. It can look complex at first glance because it's deliberately designed to look that way, to obfuscate the simplicity of the underlying mechanic. But at its core, it comes down to moving pieces around the board whenever you're offered the opportunity to do so. The semi-random nature of how and when you are offered opportunities to move these guys around, that randomness contributes to this illusion of complexity. But at its core, there are 17 dudes. 14 of them can appear at random at any time on the board. Each dude can have one of 4 jobs and a rank at that job. The combination of the person and the job determines what rewards they can drop in what is called a safe house. More on that in a minute. But there is an easy cheat sheet for the dude/job reward combinations that I'll link, and their rank, 1 through 3, just determines how good that reward is going to be. More connections between the dudes, those strings on the board, is better, because it makes more of them show up per encounter, regardless of whether those connections are good or bad, whether they are enemies or friends. It's the same, it doesn't matter. And more dudes showing up via those strings equals more rewards. Now, there are some super fancy advanced strategies that involve setting up your Syndicate board in a very specific way that takes forever to arrange, but we're going to skip all that in favor of a simple, generic strategy. The guide I'm going to link is by another content creator I'm friendly with, and I feature a lot on my channel, who goes by the handle Bullock. He tells me I should pronounce it like I'm saying bullocks, because that's why he called himself that. Now, Bullock will walk you through the specific scarabs and atlas tree that you'll use for the strategy, but here's the general gist. With Syndicate, every map you will have up to 3 Syndicate encounters associated with the different jobs. A map will always, if it is available, have intervention and research, 2 of the jobs, then at random 1 of the others, either transport or fortification. A total of 4 different possible jobs. It will always have 2 of them, intervention and research, and it can have either transport or fortification. There's literally nothing that you need to know about these jobs outside of that cheat sheet, outside of what the different dudes will reward you with if they are in that job. Nothing else specifically defines the jobs. Nothing. Now, a random smattering of dudes who have that job, when you encounter that particular mechanic in a map, they will show up to fight you when you encounter that mechanic. And sometimes other dudes who they have those little string connections with, they'll show up too. The only one of them that you need to know a little bit more about is research. It's the only slightly special one, since there's a timer on it. You have to beat these dudes before the timer expires, so for strategy, I recommend skipping all the random monsters and running straight for the main named guys at the end. They are typically at the upper right-hand corner, and you'll have to navigate through this little maze to get to them. But once they're dead, the encounter ends and you win, so just go for them. But that's the only thing that you really need to know. In all of the different jobs, fighting the dudes gives you the opportunity to do things like make new connections, those strings between them, move the dudes to different jobs, level up their rank, and gain an arbitrary resource called intelligence about their job. Once you have built up enough of this intelligence bar, you can do what's called running their safe house, accessing a separate area outside maps where you fight all of the guys who are currently associated with that job. So there is a transport safe house and a fortification safe house and so forth. And when you fight them in this safe house and you beat them, you gain access to the reward rooms. This is where you get access to those particular rewards that are defined by the combination of, all right, here's this dude in this job, so you get this reward room, as seen on the cheat sheet. Like I said, though, for our purposes in this strategy, that specific do-job combination, it's really not that important. That's why I'm not going into specific detail about it. They'll just be kind of nice bonuses if you can get particular guys where you want them. You don't need to stress about that too much. The main focus here is actually generic drops from the safe houses, consumable items called All Flames, and Syndicate medallions. As usual, you don't really, if you don't want to, need to worry too much about what these do, other than to note that they sell for a lot on the currency exchange, and you will get them fairly reliably. Intervention safe houses can also drop the unique sword Paradoxica. This is intervention safe houses specifically, and the paradoxical sword, as long as it's unidentified, you haven't unveiled it, will sell for around 100 chaos, give or take. Now, all of this means that your goal is therefore to whip through maps as quickly as possible, because intelligence builds up with every Syndicate encounter you do throughout maps. So there's no specific strategy here, just get more safe houses as quickly as possible. More maps equals more safe houses equals more All Flames and medallions, plus, of course, the other safe house rewards. The gameplay loop will look like this. You will run a map, quickly pick Syndicate options when you encounter them that cause guys to connect with each other, rank up, and build intelligence. Then as soon as you can, run the safe house, as soon as it's available. The decision making here is not complex for this version of the strategy. Bullock will walk you through the other stuff that you need to know, but it doesn't wind up being nearly as complicated as it looks. On to number 5. If we want to talk about targeting market niches that everyone needs but very few people run, look no further than Blight. At any given time, comparatively, very few people are running Blight, but it is the sole source of high-tier oils that nearly everyone needs for anointing the amulets in their builds. Golden, prismatic, tainted. As a result, these oils are usually worth over a divine each, as they are right now. And the cost of the blighted maps that you'll need to run is extremely low, between 3 and 5 chaos each. You will quickly, in a single map, make that back. You'll make that back in a fraction of a blighted map. Now, the mechanic itself is interesting and unique, and its learning curve is why I put this strategy higher on the list. But once you get the basics, you can do it in your sleep. I love Blight. I have learned Blight. At first, I loathed it. I hated it. And then once I learned it, it became very fun and relaxing for me. So, Blight is a tower defense game in which you build various types of towers to stop hordes of monsters from marching and converging on this central location that you're trying to defend, called an Ichor Pump, and they will destroy it. Every single monster that even touches the Ichor Pump takes a sizable chunk of its health bar. So once more than a few get through, if you've allowed more than a few to get even close, you're probably in danger of failing the entire encounter. You can kill these monsters with your own skills. They're normal monsters, and you will often have to do this, especially to get the ball rolling at the beginning of an encounter. But ultimately, the goal is to let your towers take over and do the heavy lifting. They can do the damage for you. In theory, the different monsters spawning from different points on the map are immune to different types of towers based on the icons above the monster spawn points. But with the right strategy, this actually ends up not mattering. And speaking of which, this strategy has been pretty timeless. It has not changed in a long time, so I'm going to link a guide from around a year ago made by popular new player-friendly content creator Zizarin. He runs down the basics of how you will use chilling towers to lock monsters in place, then a special tactic with meteor towers to kill the immobilized monsters, even bypassing fire-resistant ones, even though meteor towers are technically fire-type towers. So, in addition to the specialty oils I mentioned, which you'll see fairly routinely, if not commonly, routinely at least every few maps, the profits from Blight also come from a wide variety of other sources. This is the quintessential random stacks of stuff to be tracked by wealthy exile type strategy. Scouring orbs and fossils and essences and scarabs, alterations, plenty of chaos, plus the occasional divine orb. So for some people, this smattering of rewards is a plus. You get lots of bubblegum currency for your own personal use, and you're not limiting yourself to a small set of what some people see as boring limited drops. Others, though, find this more frustrating, having to pick up and sell a bunch of different things. It really does just come down to personal preference. For me, I see both sides of the coin on this one. Number 6. Here's a strategy that's seen a few different forms over the years, but the core of the strategy remains the same. It's called Guardian Rotations. You run a set of 4 different what are called Guardian maps while they are witnessed by the Maven. The Maven is an endgame boss, and there is a mechanic that allows her to witness you fighting other bosses. So you use your map device to cause her to witness you fighting each of the 4 mini-bosses at the ends of these Guardian maps, and then she will offer you an invitation to come and fight all 4 of those mini-bosses at once. Guardian maps, generally speaking, these are special versions of high-tier maps that contain one of these special mini-bosses at the end, and they each drop a fragment that is needed to combine together and access a larger boss fight. The main 3 sets of Guardians to think about and choose from are the Shaper Guardians, the Elder Guardians, and Cyrus's Conquerors, to fight those respective 3 endgame bosses, Shaper, Elder, and Cyrus, the Awakener of Worlds. There are a few differences between the different types of Guardian or Conqueror, although the same underlying strategy can actually be used with all of them, any of them. Cyrus's Conquerors, for example, appear in any normal map layout, any of the normal maps that you're used to, and then a portal will open to that Conqueror after you kill the map's usual boss. Similarly, Elder Guardians appear on any old regular map layout, just like Conquerors do, but Elder Guardians actually replace the normal map boss instead of popping up afterward. Meanwhile, Shaper Guardians each have their own special map layouts that don't appear anywhere else, and they are the only bosses of these layouts. There's nothing for them to replace. And these layouts, these special layouts that only appear here, they tend to be long and simple, linear, and based loosely on campaign areas. But that's about it for differences, though, between the three types. Pretty much everything else about the strategy is about the same, regardless of which of the three types you choose from, so you can just pick whichever you end up preferring, or whichever is the most profitable at the time. One of the many similarities between them is that a relatively recent change, this used to be different and now it's been unified, all work the same this way, a relatively recent change to the game makes it so that a Horizon Orb, if you use a Horizon Orb on any Guardian map, it will randomize which of the 4 Guardians in that set that the map contains. So if you're running Cyrus Conquerors, for example, Alhesman the Hunter, you've got a map with Alhesman the Hunter, you use a Horizon Orb on it, and it can randomize between the Hunter, the Redeemer, and so forth. And this is really handy because it means that you can just find or buy any of them, and then Horizon Orb one into the other. You can always have sets of 4, no matter whether you buy 18 Hunter maps and 2 Redeemer maps or 1 Crusader map. It doesn't matter. You can just use Horizon Orbs to change one into the other. Now, when rolling Elder or Cyrus Conqueror maps with these Horizon Orbs, the base type of the map will also change to be one of the standard natural Tier 16 map layouts for that league. This league, Mercenaries 3.26, you would likely, for your strategy, be targeting an easy, straightforward layout that you can just run right to the end to pretty easily, like Lighthouse or Canyon, among the natural Tier 16 drops. Shaper Guardians, on the other hand, these have the boss tied to the individual layout, so it doesn't really change anything. That makes them more straightforward. The Hydra will always spawn in the lair of the Hydra map. The Horizon Orbs just cycle between the 4 different types of map. That's all. And this strategy is a great example of synergy between different mechanics. The main goal, of course, is to kill as many Guardians per hour as possible. Many of your most lucrative rewards in this strategy are going to come from that Maven invitation, which you can only run if you've killed the 4 bosses first. And that means that you want to pair this up with other mechanics that benefit from rapid fire mapping without much slowing down to attend to lengthy mechanics. Another important feature of the strategy is that the Guardian rotation actually requires no Scarabs, which is a little unusual, and it means that you can pair this up with something that can get a lot of its power from Scarabs. This has been done with a variety of mechanics over the years. I've done it a variety of ways over the years, but the strategy I'm going to link to you now is by the popular and energetic content creator PoE Guy, and this version opts for Essence and Heist as its supplementary mechanics. Both of these are fast and lucrative. Your profits, therefore, will be distributed across Essences, Heist Deception contracts, Heist blueprints, and the various loot from the Guardian rotations, which includes boss fragments, Maven chisels, orbs of conflict, and occasionally awakened gems. The last one, number 7, farming high-tier maps with Kalguuran ore deposits. This is being presented last because it probably requires the strongest build of anything on this list. It's the only one that relies on running Tier 16.5 so-called originator maps, and these can come with some pretty dicey modifiers on them, the same ones that can come on Tier 17 maps. Pretty rippy stuff is possible here, so this is definitely a step up in danger from the others I've recommended up until this point. This strategy also has the unfortunate downside of being best executed through bulk sales on a third-party Discord server. This Discord server, called the Forbidden Trove, has a controversial reputation in the community, but fortunately you would not be interacting with any of the controversial components here. It's just a convenient central location that a lot of people use. This is a place where buyers and sellers can list the things that they have or want in large bulk, and it removes the need to do dozens of individual little trades. It lets you liquidate hours of farming result in minutes, or conversely, get a ton of what you need for your strategy in mere minutes on the other side of the coin. But despite these drawbacks, the relative rippiness of it and having to interact with this third-party server, it still manages to squeak onto this list of allegedly entry to mid-level strategies because this might be one of the craziest ratios of low investment to high returns that I've ever seen in Path of Exile, and I've been doing this a while. So what is this strategy all about? I will link you to my own farming experiment video on it, and I had a great time with it, so check it out. But here's the summary. In brief, we are taking advantage of these new, like I said, so-called tier 16.5 originator maps. These can come among their dangerous modifiers. They also come with massive bonuses to things like scarab chance, currency drops, and map drop chance, which is what we're doing with this strategy. And we are going to combine that property of tier 16.5 maps, the ability for them to roll high map drop chance. We're going to combine it with a new method of using the Settlers of Kalguuran mechanic to cram a metric ton of magic blue monsters into our maps. The goal of all this is dropping a crazy amount of tier 17 maps, corrupted 8 modifier tier 16 maps, and even corrupted 8 modifier tier 16.5 maps. These are all incredibly lucrative. We're also going to get a ton of gold, which is just generally nice for a lot of things, including currency trading with Faustus and running King's March, which can be its own source of currency. You can look up a separate guide on that. Now, the maps, the actual maps that we are finding here, are the main drivers of the profit. Those tier 17 maps, the other tier 16.5s we find, the corrupted 8 mod tier 16 maps. These are the main profit drivers, and like I said, it does make this strategy a bit of a pain to liquidate into raw currency. But as you're going to see in the video, the difference between the low cost and the high profit, it's mind-boggling. I've made a lot of profit on strategies in my day in Path of Exile, but never with such a difference from such a low cost. Now, one thing about the strategy that is up to personal choice is whether you would rather buy the maps from other players that you are actually going to run for this strategy, or try and self-sustain them. And here's the difference. If you are using the Cartography Scarab of Corruption, that means that all of the maps that you find will be corrupted with 8 modifiers. This in turn means that you will probably not be able to self-sustain your maps because too many of the tier 16.5 maps, the originator maps that you find, will either not have a good map percent roll on them, and since they're corrupted, you can't change it, or it will have some mod on it that will break your build, and again, you can't change it, so you just have to sell that map. You can't use it. On the other hand, the corrupted maps, these definitely provide more profit, so it's a personal call. Do you want to find non-corrupted maps and have the opportunity to roll them yourself, in which case you can just use the ones that you find, or do you want to sell the corrupted ones that you find and then separately buy the ones that you need that have the map rolls that you want and have the mods that your build can do? You know, it's a toss-up. You will have slightly lower profit if you go with the non-corrupted version, but both are perfectly lucrative. I have done both myself. But that does it for all 7 specific strategies. Before we wrap up the video, I'll just finish with a quick couple honorable mentions that are great strategies to aspire toward, but didn't quite make the cut because they're probably a bit too expensive or reliant on a great build. One is the popular Abyss Hordes strategy that I have a video out on. I'll link that. And the other is the Blight Heart / Invigoration Blight strategy, which Bullock has a video on. I've been running a lot of this one. I've been keeping tabs on my results with the idea that I'd like to do a video on it. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but it's been crazy good for me. Everybody that I've seen run it has had a really good time with this, but these are difficult strategies, and so that's why they remain kind of only honorable mentions. You really do need a potent build to do these and a lot of investment. So let's wrap this video up with a summary of what we've learned to kind of crystallize it down and help you remember. We started with 7 barriers or misconceptions that newer players face. Do not think it's impossible. Don't overclear maps. Avoid aimless mapping without a plan. Avoid aimless hideout puttering. Don't identify too many rares. Be sure not to misunderstand where your profit is coming from. And don't reach too far past the current capabilities of your build. Next, we did 7 positive principles to keep in mind. Consistency is king. Consumables are queen. You probably already have more than you think. Sell shovels in a gold rush. Bootstrap or snowball your strategies. Focus on synergistic strategies and grow your game knowledge. Then we closed out with 7 specific strategies that you can actually implement. Harbinger, Delve, Harvest, Syndicate, Blight, Guardian rotations, and finally, Originator map farming featuring Kalguuran ore. This has been a long video, I know that, and I really appreciate if you stuck with me. The general consensus from my community seems to be that on average, you prefer a longer format single video rather than splitting up the topic into multiple episodes, so hopefully you found this useful. If so, you may find some other content on my channel helpful too. If, for example, you are looking for a good build, check out my beginner-friendly guides on the Arc Ignite Elementalist, which I've been using to do all the farming strategies that I've talked about here. If you need a hand understanding how to even advance your Atlas in the first place and partake in endgame farming strategies, check out my guide on the Atlas of Worlds. And if you're a recent Path of Exile 2 transplant, still maybe a bit confused by the differences between the games, I've got a couple videos on that as well to get you oriented. Now, I'm sure that even in a video as long as this one, there are things that I missed or couldn't get to, so by all means, if you have a follow-up question, please feel free to leave any in the comments below, and I will get to them as soon as I can. Even if you leave the comment a long time after this video has been posted, I am happy to get back to you. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in, and take it easy.